Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of our Wisdom Share, featuring leading technology executives and sharing some of the wisdom that they have gained along the way. This afternoon, we're very thrilled to be joined by Shamoun Siddiqui. And Shamoun, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So if you could please just give the viewers of this just a little bit background about who are you and what do you do for a living, and we'll kind of start there.
Of course. So I'm the Chief Security Officer for Neiman Marcus. I've been in this role for almost 4 years now. I came here from Mr. Cooper, formerly Nation Star. I was a CISO there. Prior to that, I helped build the security program at Sabre, the travel technology company. And prior to that, I was with CVS Caremark in the early days when security and compliance became fashionable. And I was lucky enough to be there at the right time and help build their HIPAA, SOX, and PCI programs. So I've been in the industry for about 15 years or more.
Great. So you gotta help me understand, how do you go from getting a PhD in aerospace engineering into cybersecurity?
Lucky, I guess. So I ended up in California at a time when the industry, the aerospace industry, was facing a downturn. Aerospace has always been cyclic, depending on the administration's whims and desires, whether they want to support that particular initiative or not. So I ended up leveraging my technology background and getting into IT. I helped build a network for Hitachi, and then Ricoh. I helped build a data center for them and implement ERP systems. And at that time, I foresaw the rise of information security. And I started training myself in information security. I wrote the first information security policy for Hitachi and Ricoh, and that caught the attention of CVS Caremark. CVS Caremark were separate in those days. Somebody reached out and said that we saw this policy that you wrote. Are you interested in a security role? I said yes. And then, it was just, it was fate basically after that.
So you've probably seen a lot of changes. So tell me a little bit about, now that we're entering, the big words, digital transformation, but as we move into these new digital tools, has anything really changed from what we were doing before with data centers and on-prem stuff?
Oh yes, I mean we are seeing another evolution. So we went through multiple evolutions. Digital transformation became the buzzword of the decade. It meant different things to different people, but bottom line was that there was an impetus to transforming the way we develop our applications, which was very sort of waterfall based, where you would not see the results of your efforts for years sometimes, right? So the project would go on, and then 2 years later you would realize that the project was completely off of the original specifications, and it would result in millions of dollars wasted, thousands and thousands of labor hours wasted. And that resulted in this methodology of Agile Devops transformation, where you would deliver small pieces of the value stream, and you would validate that value was there, and your business and stakeholders would confirm that the value was being seen. And you had the ability to change directions very easily. So you could apply course corrections and change the direction without having to wait until the end of that whole effort. So that transformed the industry. And then the second revolution happened in terms of the infrastructure components. All of a sudden, instead of having large investments in very heavyweight computing devices, the virtualized environments became available. So we went from data center centric technologies to cloud centric technologies. And now we are seeing another evolution where, the hardware abstraction is becoming even less of a concern. It's being abstracted to a point where a developer doesn't even need to know what hardware is that. So serverless computing is evolving very rapidly. So we are on the cusp of a major revolution where data centers are going to go away. This whole conscious realization of virtual machines and containers, all of that is going to go away. People will just focus on the code itself and the functionality that they are trying to achieve.
are there certain digital technologies that you find your teams needing to use that kind of cause more concern than others?
So I think there, I forgot to mention that my role at Neiman Marcus is multi-pronged. I'm also responsible for enterprise architecture and infrastructure engineering. Now, this is remarkable. I'm starting to see security kind of evolve from just being a function sitting on the side, being at the whim and fancy of the infrastructure team and other folks to accept or reject security mandates to a point where security is becoming integrated with technology. And I've seen in other companies as well where the CISO role is slightly being elevated to the role of a technologist. And I predict that that's the way we'll see it. So at Neiman Marcus, it gives me the ability to push security as far upstream as possible. At the inception stage, when a project or a product is being designed, my enterprise architecture team is able to take my mandates of compliance and security and data protection right at the start. And then when I implement infrastructure components, I'm able to bring those components in also with an understanding that security is paramount and needs to be included in the overall implementation. So from that perspective, I see that security technologies are continuing, and we can talk a little bit more about whether they're internal facing or customer facing. But from a just a pure technology perspective, my challenge is securing the new environments. As more and more technologies end up in the cloud, and it's a multi-cloud environment, so do I need to come up with a consistent set of standards for Google and Azure and AWS? Or do I decide based on that particular environment what the controls should be? So that's one of my bigger challenges.
And how do you kind of make that determination? Is that on a per project basis, or is that just across the board based on the platform?
That's a really good question. And in my case, I feel that that's dependent on the platform. And the reason I say that is because every platform lends itself to a certain degree of automation. Automation is the key. We can no longer rely on human resources to parse through this incredible avalanche of data that's coming towards us. We have to rely on automation to protect and secure the perimeter, secure the environment, secure the data. So in our case, we have, and I think companies will have to decide where they invest the most. Which cloud environment do they invest the most in? We have invested the most in AWS, for example. So, we may have more automation in AWS than we do in Google or versus Azure. So I'm just giving that as an example. Companies could differ. Somebody might have more automation in Google, less automation in AWS, and emerging automation in Azure. So I think that's what we have to do, determine security and data protection requirements based on that specific platform, not by project, but by platform.
And will that also then apply the same to like SaaS companies if you're using Salesforce.com or some ServiceNow, something like that?
I think we are somewhat limited in dictating what a SaaS platform should look like, but we have to ask the right questions. We've had several conversations with SaaS providers where we've said, okay, tell us what your technologies are like. What do you do for single sign-on? What do you do for denial of service protection? Do you have high availability zones? So we drive that conversation, but I think we have to come in with a complement of the right questions and then see if they are measuring up. A lot of SaaS providers, I've seen SaaS providers vary in maturity across the spectrum. Some come in with extraordinary security, the likes of which I have not seen, and they answer questions that I can't even begin to ask. And I've seen this with many, many well-known companies out there. Others who are still, growing and perhaps don't have that wide of a customer base, we find them that they are limited in their security environment. So in that case, we have driven the conversation on insisting that they use one particular case, we drove the conversation in forcing that SaaS provider to use Amazon KMS for encryption. So sometimes, if you have the cloud, if the project is worth it, some of these SaaS providers can be driven towards a better security.
Here's a softball for you, and this is intended for all the CIOs watching. So, with all the data that you're collecting and all the automation stuff in process, I mean, give me a comment about, how the importance of cybersecurity has really grown significantly over the last few years.
I think what we have seen is that there has been a tremendous rise in the sophistication with which e-crime agencies are attacking a corporation. We have seen malware and e-crime being commoditized. I was talking to an FBI agent recently, and I was stunned to discover that denial of service attack can be purchased on the dark web. So small-time hackers who don't have the wherewithal can just spend a few Bitcoins and buy an attack. They can buy malware that is automated. So if our adversaries are using this level of sophistication, we have to be a step ahead. So we are being compelled and dragged along to be a little more sophisticated in how we approach and how we protect our systems and information assets.
And I remember years ago when we used to host our CISO roundtables around the country, I always heard CISOs talking about the one thing that the bad guys do really well is they coordinate with each other and collaborate. And, the CISOs not as much. So it's,
Yeah, I continue to see that reluctance. I think, I'm in touch with a lot of CISOs in the Dallas area. And while we do share information, there is this discomfort. You don't want to tell everything that you are doing because perhaps you are awkward about the level of maturity that you have, or you are worried about losing that edge. So one of those two factors continues to prevent us from being as open as we can in sharing information with each other.
Hope you heard a few things that triggered some new thinking for you. We do these conversations on IT topics weekly, so please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you get updates on new content, as well as you can post comments and, more importantly, suggest topics that you'd like us to address. You can see that we have some pretty amazing resources. So please let us know how we can help you on your upcoming digital transformation and enterprise IT projects. Thanks very much. Until next time.